begin is with some thoughts I had while writing The Bigot, or some inspiration, if you want to call it that. And I guess there are two things that are worthy of notice. The first is, a few years ago, some of you may recall, Tyler Clemente, a very talented musician at Rutgers-New Brunswick, jumped off the George Washington Bridge and committed suicide. And he did that because he was a very sensitive, sort of naive young man who was gay and had an encounter with someone else in his dorm room. The encounter was taped, went all over the tube, the YouTube, the web, and killed himself from shame and the like. The second thing that I guess influenced me in terms of writing this is aside from other work that I've done, is the strange case of President Obama. Now, I've been involved in politics a very long time. I can't remember any president who has put up with the kind of disrespect that President Obama has. From congressmen shouting "you lie" in the Congress during the State of the Union, to posters. I'll give you two of them. You can find them on the web if you like. One shows the first family, the faces of the first family, and their heads superimposed upon that of chimpanzees. The second shows the White House and the White House lawn, and it's full of watermelons. Nice, very nice. This is something that I think is rare, and obviously speaks to the first black person who has become president. But to move on from there, it seems to me that The Bigot is a logical continuation of two books that I've written before. One is A Rumor About the Jews, which is about conspiracy and the Protocols of Zion, which is the famous tract speaking about an international Jewish world conspiracy, going back to the beginning of time, great influence on the Nazis and their rise. And the second is Reclaiming the Enlightenment, which is of particular relevance here because I think there has been far too much neglect and denigration of the Enlightenment and far too little appreciation of how the Enlightenment political legacy informs a decent modern political system. Now, having said that, much work has been done, and very good work has been done, on particular forms of prejudice. Anti-Semitism, racism, sexism, homophobia. All of these things have been documented and dealt with. What has been lacking is a book which speaks about the connection between them. Or if you want to put it this way, the right term is a phenomenological foundation for dealing with prejudice as such. And that's what The Bigot is designed to do. The most simple reason for justifying this kind of position is that, in my view, prejudice never happens or is never directed simply against one group. Prejudice appears in what I call clusters. If you think of the Nazis, there was an entire hierarchy of racial stereotypes which inform their racialist ideology. You think of the Ku Klux Klan, it's the same thing. It's not just directed against blacks. And I think that's where I think we have to begin. Second thing I'd like to suggest is that if I can put it this way, the psychological structure of racism, or I'm sorry, prejudice, is basically similar. It rests on three things: projection, hysteria, and paranoia. And hysteria and paranoia, I'm sure you, all of you get. Projection is a little more complex, and it's much more interesting in a certain way. I don't know if any of you have seen, I hope you've seen, the first American blockbuster film called Birth of a Nation. This work, tremendous technical work, deals with the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. And it's very positive. It's a positive rendition of the Ku Klux Klan. One of the themes that runs through the film is the fear of black men raping white women. Of course, especially during the 19th century, the issue was not black men raping white women, but white men raping black women. So the question is, how does this work in the mind of the bigot? You can find exactly the same thing in the Weimar Republic and in the French Third Republic during the 20s and 30s. Small groups emerged. One of them, actually, I found resurfaced, reorganized itself, and trashed the bigot, which is called the Thule Society, T-H-U-L-E, a sort of proto-Nazi group in the 1920s, and they were an underground group, and they accused Jews of engaging in various assassinations, manipulation of the state, sort of erosion of the educational system, etc. That's exactly what the Thule Society was doing. And the same thing occurred in the Third Republic in France, which you can talk about further if you like. So this idea that we have to do, we the bigots, have to do, in fact, what we assume that our target is doing, is a part of the story behind lynchings, behind all the kind of atrocious activities that I think everyone in the room would condemn. The fears of the bigot are real. And his paranoia, I think, is directed against modernity. And this has always been the case. It's been directed against progress and the idea of progress, which we are much too quick to get rid of today, and which I have to say, frankly, too few of my students, well, they don't get it. Progress is not about building a better vacuum cleaner. Progress is about about a development of moral sensibility that allows you to at last say genocide is not a good thing, or war is not a good thing, or we have an input into, we should have an input into foreign policy, and the fact and that we shouldn't use the kind of language or the kind of symbolism that used to be used. In short, that progress is connected to the idea of a cosmopolitan, diverse, liberal society committed to social and economic equality. the bigot finds himself under threat because his privileges were under threat. So I'll give you two examples here, both of which I think might clarify the issue. The first is a core idea of democracy and a core idea behind the Enlightenment, which was said by Pierre Beaumarchais, who wrote the play The Marriage of Figaro, which most of you, as most of you know, turned into an opera. The line is that Figaro, the barber, says to his nemesis, the Count, "What have you ever done to deserve your privileges besides being born?" And I think that speaks to the issue, because one of the things that prejudice is based on is what we might consider natural attributes, which are then, of course, manipulated to serve particular political and social purposes. The second is more contemporary. It comes from a white supremacist band, which I also quote in the book. And it says very simply, whatever happened to America that once was so white and free? It's almost like I can pack up and go home now. Because there you have a pretty good understanding of what's at stake. The idea that America is deteriorating is part of the bigot's concern. It's the same thing with the bigot in Europe, who feels that Europe is disintegrating and deteriorating by the threat of a new multicultural order and the like. Now, deteriorating in terms of what? I think, as Benedict Anderson put it very well, that at the root of all ideology, nationalist ideology and the like, is an imagined community. Now, what is the imagined community? I'm sure most of you have seen Happy Days, the comedy, and some of you who are slightly older remember shows like Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver, and if you haven't seen them, you can see them, I'm sure, on Nick at Night. All of these shows have something in common. Andy Griffith, too, all of them. What you see is a happy community. It's not that everybody's rich. This is the usual rap that comes from a completely idiotic comment made by Bill Clinton. It's the economy's stupid. It's rarely just the economy's stupid. It's the political interpretation of the economy stupid. Because if it were really the economy's stupid, we wouldn't be in the, we wouldn't have faced the electoral loss that, or the Democrats wouldn't have faced the electoral loss that they just experienced. Since the economy is better than it was in 2007 and 8, objectively better. That may not matter, and certainly to the bigot it doesn't matter. We think, at any rate, we think of Happy Days, and we think of sort of middle-class types. In Father Knows Best, the father is, if I remember right, an insurance salesman, living with white picket fences. And what's interesting is women are in the kitchen, gays are in the closet, people of color, if they're seen at all, are doing menial tasks. You may say that's bad, but what's worse is they like it that way. You know? They like it that way in the mind of the bigot. And so the question becomes, why do they rise up? Why do they want to enter the public realm? Well, it has to be the outsider who ignites the latent, misplaced concerns of these groups. You already see this in Birth of a Nation. The enemy isn't blacks, the enemy is white liberals who are riling up the blacks in the South. Why? Because the blacks are too stupid to do it themselves. Therefore, somebody has to come in from the outside. It's the alien entity. It could be the immigrant, it could be the Jew, it could be the pointy-headed intellectual, it could be the Yankee coming down south to, during the Civil Rights Movement, to rile up our Negroes. I still remember when that phrase was used all the time. Indeed, the hysteria comes because this threat, which the bigot experiences, and it's a real threat, is extrapolated onto society as a whole. Society, not just he is under attack, but society and tradition as we know it is under attack. And, if you want to put it this way, on top of that, hysteria, or paranoid hysteria, comes a sense, I'm the one who understands this. You idiots don't understand it. I understand it. And so you get this weird kind of heroism associated with the bigot, or associated, you see it even with the Tea Party. I get it, you don't get it. I stand up. So, for example, if you look at the Turner Diaries, the multi-million selling Nazi manifesto, it's sort of written in terms of a novel, it's really about heroes. Heroes. Inspired by projection, paranoia, and hysteria. Indeed. Take this a step further. This kind of heroism, this kind of commitment, defense of an old traditional community, leads to something interesting. It leads to a reliance on myth and stereotypes, which all of you know, I'm sure, what a stereotype is. I would suggest that it's basically lumping all trends or all traditions within a particular group together, and selectively so. We on the left fall into this, or among progressive people fall into this all the time. Why I should identify as a Jew with Benjamin Netanyahu is completely incomprehensible. You know? There are other traditions within Jewish history that I identify with that run counter to the tradition to which President Netanyahu adheres. Similarly, amongst African Americans, I hate to say this, but Martin Luther King and Malcolm X aren't saying the same thing. In short, your identity involves a type of decision on your part. What are you going to be? What tradition within the identity am I going to talk about? Or am I going to identify with, if I can put it this way? It's one of the most important issues with regard to fighting bigotry. Because I think the trick for us, especially today in a somewhat postmodern, pluralist world, is that the fight against bigotry has to take place without falling into prejudice itself. Given what I said previously about the paranoia, the projection, and the hysteria, I think it becomes pretty, and of course the imagined community, I think we can say pretty clearly that the way in which the bigot looks at the world is through conspiracy fetishism, myth, and that this tends to a kind of fanaticism. Fanaticism, I think, is relatively clear. The conspiracy fetishism is a little more complex. there have been conspiracies that have taken place. That's true. Going back to the Cataline conspiracy of ancient times, to deny the existence of conspiracies as such is crazy. However, it's another matter when every issue that comes down the pike is understood as part of a conspiracy. We went into Vietnam because of rubber. Hello, you know, not happening. Oh, we went into, the United States went into Iraq because of oil. It needed oil. Hello, you know. The amount of money spent on Iraq dwarfs any possible concern we would have had with oil. The United States would have had with oil. Yeah. Again, it's not simply the economy, stupid. It's the ideology that informs the way the economy is understood. To understand Vietnam without the Cold War ideology and the domino theory and the stuff that was around then is simply absurd. In short, and this leads to a situation in global affairs which I think you should be aware of. How many books, if you think of the number of American interventions over the last, I don't know, 150 years, let's say since the Civil War, there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens. How many were undertaken against white nations and white peoples? World War I, maybe, but then again, the United States was attacked. World War II, perhaps, but most of the fighting was done in the Pacific. And that's about it. And maybe the Spanish Civil War, perhaps. If you were to look around at the American Political Science Association meetings, you'll find hardly a panel on racism and foreign policy. Hardly a panel. What does that tell you? It tells you that the ideological moment that is so ingrained in our traditions is simply forgotten. And indeed, I think one of the things that the bigot is able to do is to fanaticize these traditions and these passions and these neuroses. And the point is he's going to remain impervious to reason. That's what makes him so strong. Jean-Paul Sartre said that the anti-Semite turns himself to stone. One can say that for the bigot as well. You can see it in any number of different issues, ranging from climate change to the attack on evolution to what have you. There's no discussion here. So for those of you who think that we're going to abolish prejudice by discussion, whether in foreign affairs or at home, it's not happening. There's got to be more. Indeed. And I think that to take this seriously, we have to recognize something else. Even though in these extreme situations, we see the old language sometimes reappear, the world is different than it was in the 1930s. We don't see mass marches of Ku Klux Klan followers in hoods. We don't see the Nazi salute. We don't see racism in college curricula self-consciously put forward. No, in a certain way, the bigot is adapted. And I would suggest that he's adapted in the following way. He's adapted by assuming a role of the true believer, of the elitist, and of the chauvinist. Now, I've been accused in the bigot of simply identifying bigotry with conservatism. And and with the right-wing reaction. That's not true. I mean, it's not something I believe. You can be a conservative without being a bigot. You can even be a fascist without being a bigot. No problem. There are issues, whether it's, I don't know, school vouchers or the scope of the welfare state, whatever. Particular issues on which reasonable people can disagree. No problem. But when a situation emerges in which an entire agenda, like that of the Republican Party, centers around policies that target previously disadvantaged and excluded groups, then I have a feeling we have a problem. If Michelle Nunn is getting 93% of the black vote in Georgia, but only about 25%, whatever it was, of the white vote, and her opponent is gaining 6% of the black vote and 80% of the white vote, hello, there's something going on here. If we see and so what I would suggest, using the old phrase of Max Weber, that there is an elective affinity between prejudice or ideological prejudice and right-wing movements. I think that's true internationally. It doesn't mean that every left movement is exempt from bigotry. It does mean that in the main, historically, that connection that I just mentioned exists. How one defends oneself? Well, the claim would be today, the advocates of the far right, you think of Bill O'Reilly or whoever you want, Glenn Beck. Why do we support an attack on the welfare state? Well, we do it in the name of individual responsibility. Why do we support religion in the schools and everywhere else? It's a matter of tradition. Why do we seek to constrain voting? Well, we want to avoid fraud. In short, the bigot today uses a very different language. And I think we have to be aware of that. That's one of the crucial arguments that I try to make in the book. Indeed, it seems to me that one of the responsibilities that we have is to move beyond the kind of sensationalism that's been associated with bigotry in the United States since the rise of the mass media. It's true. Sensational acts, whether the murder of young kids or racist talk, it still pops up. These things still occur. But in the main, I'm struck by the fact that people go berserk if somebody says the wrong thing. But, oh, well, it's just a reasonable difference of opinion if we talk about an agenda which is objectively biased against targeted previously targeted disadvantaged groups. It is time to shift the emphasis. And to shift the emphasis to politics. And the first responsibility I think that we have in terms of fighting bigotry today is to highlight the policies that objectively, not subjectively, objectively forward a racist agenda, or I'm sorry, a bigoted agenda. So that's as intellectuals. I think also we should take note of the kind of I don't know how to put it, TV shows, the culture industry, like the No More commercials with regard to domestic violence. I think that's good. You have all these sports figures standing up and going, no more excuses, no more this, no more that. In short, no more domestic violence. This is a good thing. It means also that we have to recognize the value of figures like, I don't know, the actors in Will and Grace or in Ellen. To be sure, gay people don't live this way. Most of them don't. But they humanized a group that had been vilified ideologically and practically since time immemorial. It seems to me that then that we have we see the political concern, we see the ideological concern, and it's also up to us to recognize that it's time to pay the piper with regard to economic compensation, which means sacrifice. My neighborhood was, where I grew up, was composed of German Jews. They were all exiles from the Nazis. Those people were paid compensation by the German government, by a conservative German government, in fact. I don't know what the intention was, to make Germany look good, to admit the guilt, and so on. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that with this one program, my neighborhood was turned from a poor working class neighborhood into a middle class neighborhood, just like that, roughly around 1962, the time of the Eichmann trials. What's more, for those of you who are concerned about compensating excluded communities, when the Jews in my neighborhood received this compensation, it wasn't just you get a lump sum for what you suffered. You were going to become a surgeon. You were in school to be a surgeon. You would be compensated for what you could have earned as a surgeon. This was serious money. Serious money. So I don't want to hear it with regard to whether we're talking about Israel dealing with the Palestinians or the United States dealing with a disadvantaged black community. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. And we have to overcome this idea of the double standard that's so directly connected with the projection, or the psychological quality projection associated with the bigot. This means beginning to recognize this on a cosmopolitan level. Supporting pluralist attempts where they, and pluralist exchanges wherever possible. And I think the idea that we're going to abolish prejudice is naive. Prejudice has too many layers, too many different sources of input. Slights and wounds from the past, traditions validating prejudice, the fact that new groups will emerge that we don't know about now, who've experienced prejudice. For example, transgender people. When I was in school, nobody even knew a transgender person existed. You know? But now we do. And we've got to be open to that. In short, we need a kind of what I call a cosmopolitan sensibility, and that becomes the purpose of the educational project, you know, and also the critical project. In short, there's no solution, a simple solution to the problem. The bigot doesn't attempt to provide one. But perhaps it'll offer some insights, if not a final cure. So thanks very much. Perhaps we can...